The year is 33 AD, and a darkness has fallen over the Holy Land. The Son of God hangs upon the cross between two thieves, his lifeblood soaking into the rough wood. But as the hours pass, the shadows grow longer, and a storm brews on the horizon. For the veil of the temple has been torn, the earth trembles, and the very foundations of creation are about to be shattered. And it all begins with one man, a Roman soldier named Cornelius. Cornelius is a veteran of the Roman army, having seen countless campaigns across the known world. He has battled fierce generals and led his men to victory in many a hard-fought battle. Yet nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to experience on that fateful day. For as he stood guard at the crucifixion of Jesus, he felt a presence so powerful that it brought him to his knees. His heart pounded in his chest as if trying to escape his body. And when he looked up at the sky, he saw not the serene heavens he had always known, but a swirling maelstrom of crimson clouds that crackled with golden lightning. As he watched in awe and terror, the earth rumbled beneath his feet, and the very foundations of the cosmos seemed to shake. Then, as if in response to the turmoil in his soul, a voice boomed across the heavens, echoing with the power of 1,000 thunderclaps. My son, why do you doubt?" Cornelius froze, his blood turning to ice water in his veins. He knew that voice. It was the voice of God himself, and it was calling out to him. What did it mean? Why was God speaking to him, a lowly Roman soldier? Was he being summoned before the Almighty? Was this the moment when his fate would be decided? Fear and trembling took hold of him, paralyzing him with their icy grip. And then, as if in answer to his unspoken question, another voice rang out, clear and strong, filled with an authority that commanded attention. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." It was the voice of Jesus, the voice of the crucified Christ. And as Cornelius heard those words, something within him shifted. The fear that had been gripping him began to recede, replaced by a sense of wonder and awe. Could this be the moment when his world was turned upside down? When the old order was broken and a new one was born? As he looked from the tormented face of Jesus to the raging sky, he knew that he was witnessing something beyond human comprehension. Something divine was happening, something that would change his life and the course of history forever. As Cornelius stood there in stunned silence, the full weight of the moment crashed down upon him. In that instant, he realized that he was in the presence of the divine, that the very fabric of reality was being torn asunder and restitched in ways he could not fathom. What was happening here, on this hill overlooking Jerusalem, would echo throughout eternity. The forces of heaven and hell were colliding in a battle that would determine the fate of humanity itself. And yet amidst the chaos and upheaval, there was a strange sense of calm that settled over Cornelius. The fear that had been clawing at his heart eased, replaced by a quiet determination. He was a soldier, after all, and soldiers didn't flinch in the face of danger. He faced it head-on, whatever the cost might be. So with newfound resolve, Cornelius straightened his shoulders, squared his jaw, and turned back to his post. He would stand guard over the crucified Christ until the end, come what may. But as the minutes ticked by, the storm in the sky grew ever more intense. The lightning split the heavens, illuminating the tortured face of Jesus against the backdrop of gathering darkness. The thunder roared, shaking the very foundations of the earth. And then, as if in response to the tumult in the natural world, something extraordinary happened. Cornelius felt a warmth spread through his body, a warmth that seemed to emanate from the crucified Christ himself. It enveloped him, filling him with a sense of peace and serenity he had never known. And then, as suddenly as it began, the warmth intensified, becoming a searing white light that blinded him and brought him to his knees. When he looked up, he saw not the angry visage of a wrathful God, but the gentle countenance of a loving Father. Cornelius gasped, his mind reeling from the sight before him. The light was coming from the torn veil of the temple, that sacred barrier that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the building. It was glowing with an otherworldly radiance, casting long, dancing shadows around him. And then, as if drawn by an invisible force, Cornelius found himself rising to his feet and walking toward the light. He didn't know where he was going or why, but he couldn't resist the pull. It was as though some unseen hand were beckoning him forward. As he drew closer to the veil, the light grew brighter, filling his vision and driving away the lingering darkness. And then, as he reached out to touch it, something incredible happened. The light surged through him, coursing through his veins like 1,000 suns, igniting his very core. He cried out in surprise and pain, his body racked with tremors. As the light transformed him from the inside out, it was as though his soul were being stripped bare, laid open to the scrutiny of the divine. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the light vanished, and Cornelius found himself standing in the midst of a crowd of onlookers. But they weren't the same people he had seen moments before. Their faces were radiant with joy, their eyes shining with a light that mirrored the glow of the veil. And in the center of it all stood Jesus, his form no longer battered and bruised, but whole and radiant, as alive as Cornelius had ever seen him. Cornelius stared in disbelief as Jesus raised his hands and the crowd fell silent. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," Jesus proclaimed, his voice echoing with power and authority. "He who believes in me will not perish, but will live." Cornelius felt a surge of emotion course through him, a mixture of awe, wonder, and gratitude. He had witnessed the resurrection of Christ, the very cornerstone of the Christian faith. And in that moment, he knew that his life would never be the same. As the crowd erupted in cheers and began to disperse, Cornelius hesitated. He wanted to speak to Jesus, to ask questions that had been burning in his mind for weeks. But as he turned to follow him, Jesus vanished, leaving behind only the echo of his words and the memory of his radiant smile. Cornelius sighed, realizing that he would have to wait for another time to seek out the risen Christ. For now, he had a duty to attend to the body of the Centurion Longinus, who lay still and lifeless at the foot of the cross. As Cornelius approached the body, he felt a sudden surge of energy course through him, invigorating him and filling him with a sense of purpose. He knew what he had to do. With newfound strength and determination, Cornelius knelt beside the centurion and began to minister to him. He checked his wounds, turned him gently, and made sure he was comfortable. All the while, he prayed silently, asking God for guidance and strength. And then, as he looked down at the lifeless face of the centurion, something amazing happened. Cornelius felt a surge of power flow through him, and he knew that God was giving him a special gift. With trembling hands, he placed them on the centurion's chest and began to massage his heart vigorously. At first, nothing happened. But then, as Cornelius continued to press on, he felt a faint pulse beneath his fingers. Hope surged through him, and he pressed on, refusing to give up. Suddenly, the chest began to rise and fall in a shallow but steady rhythm. Cornelius's heart pounded in his chest as he watched and waited. And then, as if waking from a deep sleep, the centurion's eyes fluttered open. Cornelius beamed, overcome with joy and relief. He had brought the centurion back to life, not because of any special skill or power he possessed, but simply because he had been guided by the Holy Spirit and had trusted in God's will. And as the centurion regained his senses and sat up, he looked at Cornelius with gratitude and admiration. "You saved my life," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with emotion. "How can I ever repay you?" Cornelius shook his head, his heart filled with humility. "It was God who saved you, not me," he replied. "All I did was follow his lead." The centurion nodded, understanding dawning on his face. He had witnessed the power of God firsthand, and he knew that Cornelius was a vessel through whom that power had flowed. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Cornelius and the centurion shared a moment of silence. Neither man knew what the future held, but they were bound together by the events of the past few days and the knowledge that they had witnessed the resurrection of Christ. For Cornelius, it was the beginning of a new life. He had left the darkness of disbelief and had stepped into the light of faith. And as he looked up at the sky, he knew that he was not alone. God was with him, guiding him and sustaining him on his journey.